Hey guys, how's it going? Hopefully good. Today we are back in Yield Minecraft and I have a pretty fun little trick to show you today that I think you're going to find pretty cool if you're maybe a map maker or a server owner or anything really, it doesn't really matter, but this is pretty neat. So this trick revolves all around this guy right here, this little slime. You wouldn't think it, but this guy holds a pretty neat little trick up his sleeve. If he had sleeves, he doesn't. Well, he has a trick in his goo or something. The only problem is he needs to be just a little bit bigger, or maybe I'm just smaller. Who knows? Alright guys, so what exactly is today's video about? Now if you're a keen viewer, you may remember a couple months ago I made a video on how to improve base building and faction style gameplay with beacons. That was pretty cool, but since then I've been looking for a way to actually illustrate territories in Minecraft in a dynamic and easy to use way. So what exactly do I mean by that? Let me show you. So here we have two factions, the blue noble sheep of the grasslands and the evil evokers of the nether. Now obviously these two guys are ancient enemies and they've built their own factions to oppose one another and they're locked in an ancient war. It's very deep history, lots of lore there. But anyway, they've built all of these things, but they're not really sure exactly whose territory is whose. So how exactly can we actually show this? Interesting enough, up to this point, I couldn't think of a good way to do this, but then it hit me that slimes are the answer. Let's take a look at this. Well guys, take a gander. This is how to mark off custom territories in the game. So, I'm sure you can figure out how this works already because I've kind of already told you, but let's take a closer look and explain a little bit about what's going on. So, if we go down right down to ground level, you will see that these act kind of similarly to the world border, except these are really, really customizable and very, very fun to work with. So, as you can see, we've got the green area and the red area, and they mark out pretty much perfectly where the red faction and the green faction ends and begins. So let me just take a look on what's going on here because you might be a little bit confused on what exactly this graphical effect is. Now I'm sure you're familiar with the glowing effect. It's essentially a special effect which creates this spectral outline for the affected mobs, which basically allows you to see it through solid walls. But slimes are obviously a really good candidate here because they are scalable to whatever size you want. Now there's obviously a little bit of a problem here because slimes are cubes, and because they're cubes they render a little bit strangely, especially if you're trying to create planes. So what I've done here is I've replaced the very top of the head texture with a new texture. The way the glowing effect handles textures is that if something is completely invisible, it doesn't affect the glowing effect whatsoever. So because of this, you can create some really, really cool effects. Let me show you. Okay, so as you can see here, we have a regular, more basic border. So as I mentioned, the texture dictates how the border actually appears. So before we had more of a jagged type thing, but now that we have this just regular square, it just renders like this. And this is completely and utterly customizable. Now, a nice little feature is that because this uses the glowing effect, and the glowing effect can use teams, and teams can use colors, you can actually create some pretty neat little effects like this highlighted blue spot if you wanted to create a brand new faction. But realistically, you can create a really wide variety of stuff with this. I showed marking territories, but here's a couple more examples. Right here, I have I don't know, maybe like a projectile marking system. Let's pretend we have a catapult and we want to kind of visualize where that projectile is actually going to land. You can actually use the slime right here to kind of indicate where it's going to land. It's a pretty cool little effect, I think. Another idea for this is you could visualize something like TNT's blast radius. And because obviously these slimes are scalable, you can scale the effect. So the more TNT you have, the bigger the blast radius. Pretty cool little thing. It's really just a circle, but you can go crazy with the designs if you want. Now, personally, I think this looks better with the resource pack, but that's not to say you can't use the default resource pack, you know, if you're an old fart. But yeah, it does work in the default resource pack. It looks a little bit different, but word of warning, if you do want to use the default resource pack, it's actually better to use magma slimes because they have a more cuboid model, if that makes sense. You can see that the slimes actually do have a little bit of an artifact. That's because they are not actually quite cubes. They've got little gelatinous little blobs in there. But anyway, guys, that is pretty much all there is to it. A very simple effect, but I genuinely think this is a really, really fun thing to play around with. If you enjoyed this video, guys, a like is, of course, always much appreciated. Subscribe if you're not already. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Now, how do I get out of this circle?